Hello, and welcome to Grade.com Talks With. Today we're talking with Carrie Foster, diversity engagement specialist, comedian, TED speaker, and founder and CEO of Frame, Foster Russell Alliance for Meaningful Expression, an organization that is inspiring free speech, social change, and empowerment through education and mentorship. And if you're new to our podcast, please press subscribe button either on YouTube or your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about an organization that is building unity through communication and practice of free speech. Good morning, Karith. Welcome to Grade.com Talks With. We're excited to have you here.
Good morning, Karim. Thank you for having me.
How could you please describe your organization for someone who is not familiar with your work?
Absolutely. So Frame is a obviously nonprofit organization whose primary goal is to create a culture of connection through communication and through expression. And we truly believe that without free speech, there is no, communication. Without communication, there's no unity. So the idea is, not free speech for the sake of everybody just, being able to spew the awful and the nasty and the whatever they want to say. It's hey, let's have an open exchange of ideas so that we can understand where someone else is coming from, either be strengthened in our convictions or be able to come to a place where we can agree to disagree, but still have our common humanity and the goals that come with that intact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the 21st century, we seem to be connected, yet at the same time, we seem to be disconnected. And we need more communication. You mentioned that communication is the key, that we are open and we are able to listen and hear rather than just something going past through our ears. And the fact that you're working on that is very acknowledging. How big of an issue is absence of the platform or presence of the platform for free speech in the 21st century?
Well, right now it is. It's becoming exponential, which is kind of ironic because the whole reason people go to colleges and universities is to broaden their horizons, expand their knowledge base. Yet we're finding on a lot of campuses now that there are many students and faculty now included in the numbers of people who are afraid to speak, who are afraid to share their thoughts and ideas for fear of either offending or of being canceled. Right? Because what if I don't say the right thing? What if it comes out wrong? And it seems that we're seeming to ignore many things that seem common sense, like intent, right? And reference points to what the person was actually sharing about, whether it was a quote from a very public person like Malcolm X, or it was, they were sharing someone else's words, or was it that actually their words? And I think what's happening is we are shutting down, right? And when we shut down as a society, then we become stagnant. And what Frame hopes to inspire, Foster Russell Alliance for Meaningful Expression, is to get the conversations going again, to get the civil discourse happening, to have people sitting face to face with one another. And you said something very important. There is a difference between hearing and listening. And listening is actually a very active thing for someone to do. Because when you're listening to someone, not only are you hearing them, but you're paying attention to them. You're focused on what they're saying. You're actively engaged in the conversation to the point where you're not distracted. You've put your phone down. You are open to hearing what they have to say, even if it goes against the grain of your core beliefs. The fact that you've given someone that audience, right, which does require grace in many instances, but it also and patience and maturity. But if that can happen and it goes both ways, oh my gosh, the results that we can get, the conversations we can have, the progress that we can make as a society. I mean,
wow. Thus, your last sentence moved me. the meaningful expression. And if we could just be there and hear and listen and be open to someone other's opinion without judging, but understanding where they're coming from, and instead of canceling them, rather than helping them to understand where they might be wrong or where they might be right, is very essential. And you mentioned that in US colleges and universities, students and faculty members, because of being afraid of the cancel culture or not being heard in the right direction, they're shutting down and they're closing down. Why is it important for students and faculty members to voice their expressions, to raise their concern? And how can we be more understanding of diversity? Because there's not one way or another way. There is more meaning behind diversity.
Absolutely. And I love that you touch on that, because I actually use the term inversity, because I think the word diversity it's kind of been hijacked. And if you think about it, really the root of the word diversity is divide and division, right? And that's what a lot of what we've been doing as a society. We've been placing people into these categories of diverse and not diverse, right? We've also said, well, you're only diverse if you meet these qualifications, and diversity only is represented by this issue, whether it's race or ethnicity or religion or gender. Well, there's also diversity of thought. And that's something that should be taken into consideration, especially as part of this conversation. And with inversity, my goal is to shift the focus of the traditional diversity of what separates and divides us to what do we have in common? How can we be truly inclusive of one another? And most importantly, and this is the most critical aspect, how can we be introspective? Meaning understanding your value, your worth, your connection to humanity. Because when you can see those things in yourself, that's when you can then see them in someone else. And we have been working from the outside in for decades now. Now it's time to work from the inside out, which calls upon people to take personal responsibility, right? And again, it calls upon people to have some grace, right? And be able to come from a place of understanding and forgiveness, but also openness to hearing where someone's coming from. If we don't know where someone's experiences are being drawn from, we're going to make all sorts of assumptions, but you will not know unless you engage in an active conversation where you're listening and hearing and asking questions and not just making these assumptions about one another, which we do. You said judge. You used the word judge earlier, and we do that on a regular basis. And if we can shift from having a judgment to having an opinion, like that will change the world. Everybody's entitled to opinion. Opinions are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. A judgment means you're thinking that everybody should think exactly the same way you do. And if they don't, then they're wrong. And that's caused wars. Okay.
Absolutely. The fact you mentioned about inversity and the history behind diversity being dividing, rather inversity calling in, working from inside out. That's very beautiful and very insightful. And I really I think that's one of the new words that will be added to my dictionary and will be used in my vocabulary more often. You mentioned that your organization is aiming for meaningful expression, especially through education and mentorship. Could you please talk more about it, and how does that work?
Sure. So what we do is we take programs. The very first one was called Stereotyped 101, which is a humorous program about D&I. We actually have an Inversity 101 now, And we have created a curriculum that is going to take different modules to colleges and universities so that when they do have the opportunity, say, whether it be for orientation or to, they've been told they have to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, we want to give them an alternative to, what's out there that is causing the division and the polarization, to say, look, we can do this and be inclusive and have these great conversations and not have people leaving feeling like they've either been victimized or vilified, because that's not really how you bring people together. And so it's through the programming that Frame has that we take and we offer, sometimes live, sometimes virtual, to these institutions to create this space of connection. And hopefully, again, with the curriculum, we're giving them the opportunity to have the through line. So it's not just a one and done, because I think we all know that just, having somebody come in, give a great talk, that's all fine and good. But it's like seeing a good movie or reading a good book. After a couple of weeks, the memories start to fade. Right? You lose the high and you kind of forget and you go back to where you started from. And that's what we don't want to have happen. We are at such a critical point in society right now where we truly want people to maintain a level of awareness, conscious empathy, active listening, responsible reactions, and environmental awareness. Who are you associating with? Who are you, not including in your conversations? Who are you deliberately avoiding? And why? Because of an idea that you had, a prejudice, a bias, which, by the way, every single one of us has. And the idea isn't to lay shame or blame and say you're a bad person for thinking this way or having done this. It's, hey, think about what you're missing out by not being inclusive. The opportunities, the relationships, the experiences. Be a little selfish in that respect, but then think about the benefits of what will happen, not just in your life, but in society, if we can all be there. And this isn't to say we're going to leave singing Kumbaya and holding hands, right? This is the real world. We're going to have people with different views and different ideas. But the idea is, why do we have to be at war with one another over it? Why does there have to be a head-to-head? Why do we have to say you're not invited to speak on my campus because I don't agree with your philosophy? Like that's like, this is where the personal responsibility comes in as well. Like, we have to own how we're going to let someone else's actions and words and ideas affect us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the naming of your course, Stereotypes 101, is very on point. I myself, when I was in high school, I was an exchange student from Tajikistan, and I went and stayed in rural California in Central Valley, and having an Asian face, being of a Muslim faith, and being associated with the Russian culture, there was so much stereotypes.
There's a lot there to unpack.
Yes. But once people were open to understand my culture, to understand where I'm coming from, there was so much open discussion. There's so much knowledge that I could share with them, and the knowledge they could share with me that I could bring home and share it with my community, and for them as well to expand their horizons, understand that like people coming from Soviet Union are not of a communist background, or Muslims are not terrorists, or Asians are all Chinese, or something like that.
Right,
so it's very important to break those stereotypes. And the first step is always stereotypes. And I really appreciate that you are addressing that. And you mentioned that there is also work that needs to be inside, because yes, we can go to those classes. Yes, we can hear people come and talk. However, if we don't fully embrace it and sustainably practice it, there's no benefit in it. I can sense a lot of passion in your voice when you talk about meaningful expression, when you talk about creating safe space. Where does your passion come from?
It comes from growing up being, having a very interesting life, in that, I grew up in a place that was not very diverse. I was always the only person of color in my classes, typically, even until I went to college. My freshman year, I was the only Black person in my dorm. And that was my normal. And what I realized is we all have our prisms of normal, right? But at some point they have to shift. And mine shifted when I went away to college, but I studied in Washington, D.C. I did an internship program there where I was exposed to new cultures and people and religions and ideas. And it was like, I felt like I'd hit the jackpot because I knew there was more than what I'd grown up with. Not that what I had was bad, but I needed more. And what I've realized is that, again, we all have this quote unquote prism of normal, right? Which does, whether you grew up with a very diverse environment, like you grew up in New York City, where you hear different languages spoken all the time. And, there's Italian neighborhoods and Dominican neighborhoods and, or you grew up in like the whitest of white places in Iowa, and you were an adult before you saw a Black or brown person. That's not bad. Those aren't bad things. And what I want to take out of the conversation is that there's a right or a wrong. Just like, to demonize someone because they don't know, or they're asking questions because they're curious versus they're so much about this is about language, right? And intent, as I said. But we have to take the personal responsibility in how we interpret these things as well. And I am very conscious and cognizant of the language that I use. In fact, you'd mentioned the word safe space. And because I think that word's kind of been hijacked a little bit too, I want to create brave spaces, right? Brave spaces where people can show up who they are as they are, confident in themselves, but also open enough and brave enough to accept someone else who's different.
Mm-hmm. Well, your story is very colorful and very dynamic. You mentioned that you were one of the few people who were different in your classroom, but then you were exposed when you went to Washington, D.C. to many different cultures, many different viewpoints, and you embraced it. And now you are sharing your experience and helping others to build such experiences to such platforms. That's wonderful. You mentioned about intent, and you mentioned about bravery. How do you think people's action and people's embracement of intent and their bravery without crossing the line will change in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I certainly hope that more people come into their own, meaning that they go back to the primary focus of inversity, which is understanding their value and their worth. Because what I do believe is that when people know their value, when they understand that the fact that they are on this planet, it's not an accident, and that they have a purpose. And when you can understand that about yourself, then that's when you can understand that about the people that are surrounding you. And you have a respect, just an innate respect for that life. Even if it's not one that you would be living, it's still like a fellow human being. And not to be totally esoteric and woo-woo about it, but like love has to be a factor. There's a reason that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about love and compassion. And I think that is something that should always be part of the conversation. We have to create a connection between the heart and the mind. The heart is actually not just this organ that pumps blood through your body and keeps you alive. It is a little brain. There are over 40,000 neurons, and your heart can think independently and feel independently and reason independently. And that is why, this work, you said I'm so passionate about it. I'm passionate about it because I understand that is what's making the difference. The conversations that we're having when we reach people, not just in their head, but in their hearts, that's what moves us forward. And I think that with that understanding, in the next 10 to 15 years, we will absolutely be in a much better place where, we're not so ready to just, jump on somebody and cancel them because they said the wrong thing. We're also human beings. We're going to make mistakes. We're fallible. We're going to say the wrong thing sometimes, but we can also have redemption. And we need to have forgiveness be part of the conversation. But we also need to own if we, were in the wrong. again, that personal responsibility. And this isn't a two-way street. This is a 6-lane highway, that requires everybody to do their part.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, collectively taking responsibility and valuing love and forgiveness is something we should aim for, and hope that it will bring us together rather than divide us further apart. If someone would like to support Frame, how can they do that?
Absolutely. And it would be so appreciated. So our website is fosterrussell.org. And we are kind of fooling around with some social media handles right now, but at the moment, fosterrussell.org is definitely one of the best ways to get to us.
Wonderful. The link to Foster Russell's Alliance for Meaningful Expression website will be provided in the link in the description, and will provide necessary information so you can access and learn more about the work of Karith and the Frame. Thank you so much, Karith, for this wonderful discussion, and we hope the best for the Frame, and take care.
Karim, thank you. It's been an honor.
If you like this conversation, please press like and share button, because this will show the YouTube and podcast algorithm that this conversation is important. We need more bravery, and we need more brave spaces for people to practice their freedom of speech, yet take responsibility for their action. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.